Department, Omali, Yeshitela. My name is Akile Anai, and I am the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. Today's study is a continuation of the history of the African People's Socialist Party, which we've made into a special series due to the importance of laying out our history that spans over 4 decades. In the last study, we discussed the genesis of Black Power, the 60s era, which would lead us to today's discussion, solving the problems of the revolution, the 70s era, where we will hear from Chairman Omali Yeshitela, leader and founder of the African People's Socialist Party and Uhuru Movement, Chimurenga Silambao, veteran and current member of the African People's Socialist Party, and Comrade Penny Hess, chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee. We themed this discussion Solving the Problems because several history transforming events occurred during this time that served to bring scientific theory and answers to outstanding questions. We would see the consolidation of the African People's Socialist Party in 1972, the fierce international campaign to free Desi Woods, the introduction of the concept dual and contending power, the forming of the African People's Solidarity Committee in 1976, bringing to the world for the first time a practice of material solidarity through paying reparations. This decade was a critical one for the development of our worldwide African working class-led revolution, and this morning we will hear from forces that were there during this time to make it all happen and who are still fighting as a part of this movement today. During this discussion, we ask that you engage and ask questions directed at any of our participants. Comrades, brothers, and sisters, we present the history that those colonial textbooks wouldn't dare disclose. It is my honor now to turn it over to Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who will open up this discussion for us today. Uhuru.
Uhuru, comrades. I want to welcome everybody to today's study. As it has already been mentioned, we are looking really at Chapter 5 of the political report to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party, the title of which is The History of the Party. And we think it's really important to have this discussion because our party has been around now for about 46 years. And being around a long time is not in and of itself a statement of significance. Sometimes forces have been around for a long time precisely because they did not represent any kind of threat to the social system. But that has not been our case. And in fact, the United States government has been extraordinarily brutal in destroying any revolutionary movement that has come into existence, and certainly making every effort to do that. And while many people remember justly the significance of the Black Panther Party, the fact is that the Black Panther Party only had a meaningful revolutionary existence of about 3 years. And the government wiped it out, destroyed it, and that is how, and even the glorious movement of Marcus Garvey, which has left its imprint on the revolutionary movement of our people that carried us through the significance of Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam, and today the African People's Socialist Party, the actual revolutionary significant life of the Universal Negro Improvement Associations and African Communities League. The real dynamic existence was only about 4 or 5 years. The U.S. government has been quite brutal in destroying it. But what's been really important is to be able to recognize the history of this revolutionary movement, and to not just as an ability to recount events that happened in the past. You know that some of the most insignificant forces that we are confronted with are those who have their annual Malcolm X events and their annual markers, Garvey birth-related events, but they do not have a connection with revolutionary struggle, and it doesn't explain anything at all. We are in the African People's Socialist Party. We are materialists. We are also committed to a dialectical and historical materialist approach to investigating and analyzing the world and events. And so it's not just a matter of being able to talk about what happened on this date and that date, but also being able to recognize the significance of occurrences in history and how these occurrences have stemmed from the struggle of the people to change their circumstances, to change the world, and have led to transformation, changes in the world. That's what's really important for us to be able to do. And so we talk about the history of the African People's Socialist Party because it's a remarkable history that has endured the worst attempts to destroy our overall movement, and has learned from not only the attempts to destroy the movement, but from the ongoing work to make a revolution in the face of those attacks, and as a consequence of the effectiveness of the attacks in general, so that even while a movement has been crushed as a revolutionary movement, the party has been able to survive. The Uhuru movement and the African People's Socialist Party have been able to survive and to participate in solving the problems left to us by the assault on the revolution. And this has contributed to our development, and it has contributed indirectly to the development of the revolutionary movement itself, not only here in the United States, but because we are African internationalists, we recognize the connection of the revolutionary struggle of African people in the United States as being immediately, directly connected to the struggles of African people around the world. And also we recognize that the struggle of African people in the United States is, even as it is a part of the, and critical to the African Revolution as such, it is also a component of the revolution of the Americas. And then that this movement is connected to the aspirations, the struggles of oppressed people worldwide. That is to say, the majority of the peoples of the world. And there are people who get confused and can only see the world based on, and experience the world based on where they are located. But where we are located is in connection with the entire world. And the world that we live in is one where the vast majority of the people are extraordinarily poor. The majority, the vast majority of human beings are extraordinarily poor. The vast majority of human beings are fighting for their very lives, their existence on a daily basis, trying to secure clean water, trying to be able to deal with nature in a fashion so that shelter and is something that's available on a regular basis. This is the majority of the people, and sometimes people who are located in places like the United States or in places like Europe and there are other places. Sometimes even in the most oppressed sectors of the world, we see the world not through the experiences of the oppressed, but through the experiences of the oppressors, the exploiters. This is how we experience the world, even if we are in oppressed circumstances ourselves, because the oppressors are the ones who explain our existence to us through 1,000 different ways. So I just wanted to say that I think is extremely significant. And what I wanted to do is open up the beginning of this with the beginning of the chapter itself with what I'm working. Is on page, we'll be on 155. I just want to read a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is Comrades Chimaringa Silambayo and Chairwoman Penny Hess of the African People's Solidarity Committee are here as well. And much of the history that we're going to talk about, they have experienced and been a part of. And this history of the revolutionary movement is so important because there are so many people today who have discovered something. They haven't discovered revolution, even though sometimes they may occasionally use the term revolution, but they don't often use the term revolution. I want to be clear that the African People's Socialist Party is a revolutionary organization. And we have seen our responsibility as one of completing the black revolution of the 1960s. We have said that we shall never be satisfied, and the aspirations of our people and the interests of our people shall never be satisfied until those aspirations are realized through the actual conquest of political power in the hands of the African working class as the advanced detachment, the class as the advanced detachment of the whole African nation. This is what we are struggling about, and most of the forces that we do work with, and we work often with a lot of very smart people, are not committed to overturn the social system and the actual capture of political power. Not just a criticism of what happens to us, but an actual capture of political power, which presupposes the most serious kind of organization among the African working class. That is the critical social force that's necessary for overturning the social system and building the new world that we are committed to. And that's who this party is, and that's what we are about. And we work with a lot of other forces who we know are good forces in general terms, but they are not committed to this project. And we see this project, that is to say, the actual capture of political power, revolutionary capture of political power, the overturn of imperialist capitalism, this is, and the unification and liberation of Africa and African people worldwide. If you're not talking about that, you're just talking. And our objective is to go beyond talk and not just to explain the world, but to change it. And to change it, that means that we have to have the power. And that's what we're about, struggling to conquer all of those things that stand between us and the ability of the capture of political power. So, and the African People's Socialist Party is the fundamental instrument that we have created to make this happen. So I'm going to start, I think I said on page 155, which would be chapter 5 of the political report to the 7th Congress. I'm saying, someone has said something. It's chapter 5, the political report. Uneasy Equilibrium. Uneasy Equilibrium, yeah. This is from Uneasy Equilibrium? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So the development of our party has been dialectical, containing within it the history and struggle of African people from the past, which informs our understanding of the present and our projections for the future. Our party emerged in 1972 from the actual resistance of Africans fighting colonial domination in the US and in Africa. Our ideological trajectory comes directly from our attempts to solve the real, pressing, practical problems confronting our movement against imperialist white power. And I want to read this again, that our ideological trajectory comes directly from our attempts to solve the real, pressing, practical problems confronting our movement against imperialist white power. It's not just a discussion. And then beyond that, we said our party emerged in 1972 from the actual resistance of Africans fighting colonial domination in the United States and in Africa. In the United States and in Africa. We are part of a revolutionary movement that responds to the fact that the African nation has been forcibly dispersed and enslaved, colonized around the world, and that there is no separate solution for African people in the United States or in Haiti or any place in the Caribbean or Africa. There is no separate solution. That it is a single profound contradiction manifesting itself in different ways in different parts of the world, in different languages and what have you, but one revolutionary struggle. That's the thing that we are fighting for, and we've been clear on this for a very long time. Our history is based in the most radical activist sector of what is popularly known as the civil rights movement. Unlike the civil rights movement and organizations whose focus was on changing or reforming America, ours was a selfish motivation to win the liberation of African people led by the African working class, regardless of its consequences for America or any other power. Our objective was to win the liberation of our people, regardless of the consequences of that liberation for America or any other power. And it's important to say that because we continually hear people who are concerned about if we make this kind of struggle, what are the implications for the United States and et cetera. And then fascism might come or any other kind of thing that might come. What has to come is the liberation of African people regardless of the consequences for America. This is our politic, and this is the thing that we want to continue to say. Our party was born of the brutal repression that destroyed our movement for happiness and the return of our stolen resources in the 1960s. Our mission was defined in part by that repression. We were the living embodiment of the words of Fred Hampton, Black Panther Party leader, murdered by U.S. agents on December 4th, 1969, who said, "You can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution." The 1960s saw the imperialist murders of Patrice Lumumba and the wounded and captured Che Guevara, along with the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah, Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Fred Hampton, Bobby Hutton, and Carl Hampton are among the victims of the imperialist counterinsurgency that attempted to reverse the course of history. As revolutionaries were jailed and assassinated throughout the U.S. and the world, the birth of our party constituted an organizational way forward. So I just think it's really important to make this statement that this was history of a revolutionary period, a revolutionary movement. This is the thing that we were born of. And this was a period of killings and jailings of our revolutionary leaders, our movement, attacks on it, and not the comfortable places where you can have and often do experience in universities and behind computer screens and stuff like that. It was a genuine revolutionary movement. We would talk. We would talk a lot about the attack on our movement in the 1960s. In fact, this is much of what it is about. But the party was born in 1972 from the Uhuru movement, coming from SNCC and Jomo and what have you. And I had been imprisoned as a SNCC organizer in the city of St. Petersburg, Florida, after removing this hideous affront to African and human dignity that hung on the wall of the City Hall for years, for more than 3 decades. It was an offensive mural that white people call art, then and still do, resulting in fights all around the world. Their art, that they, mascots that they use for sports teams of indigenous people, and the insults that's made against Muslims around the world by the civilized French, who are always surprised because somebody responds in a very violent way to this ongoing assault on our dignity as a people who've been robbed of everything else. And so I was in prison for taking down this mural. I was sentenced. I was tried on several different offenses and sentenced to 5 years in prison for that. And it was on one of those occasions in prison, because I would sometimes be freed on a bail bond. I went to prison in 1967. The mural I tore down was in end of 1966. And I was in and out of prison for that. I was sometimes freed on a appeal bond, appealing the prison sentence and briefly out on the streets. And on one of the occasions when I was in prison, this is not even in the document, but this is a living history that we're talking about. And I think it's really important for people to understand that this is not just some abstract discussion that we have. I'm talking about struggles that our people have been involved in, our movement was involved in, life and death struggles that you don't get the essence of in a political report, and certainly you don't get the essence of it in a classroom or in a lecture from some very smart, African person. So I just remember on one occasion, because the sentence and the offense followed me into the prison system. I'm on trial all the time in Florida, in St. Petersburg and in Pinellas County, Florida, for a number of assaults. There were record-breaking hearings in terms of the duration of the hearings, lasting almost to midnight. The hearings that were going on in Pinellas County with my case and the case of the other comrades who were arrested with me. There were most ridiculous and offensive kinds of things done to us under the guise of law. And this, I such say the guise of law, it was laws. It is laws, colonial law that was made specifically, and certainly laws that were carried out specifically in a fashion designed to maintain the relationship of African people who were colonized. And so I was in prison during this 5-year prison sentence. I had spent several months in Pinellas County Jail, St. Petersburg, Florida jail. They had a jail in St. Petersburg, Florida on one occasion. And on one occasion, while they had me in solitary confinement, where they kept me a lot. And I remember being in this cage in solitary confinement, and the jailers would bring through these white school children to this cage I was in, this solitary confinement, escorting them and showing them me, like locked up in this cage in solitary confinement. And then this was in the early period. This would have been 1967 probably. And then later on, during the time that I was mentioning in prison, and I mention all of this because it was the first Black Power action, not just calling for Black Power, but political action, direct action for Black Power that had happened in this country. And so it was something that frightened the people. The cops who arrested me were literally trembling because they had never confronted this kind of African before. This African that was talking about power, Black Power, it scared the hell out of them. So the cop that arrested me literally was trembling when he grabbed my arm. And so now, and so this is something that is not just happening in St. Petersburg or Pinellas County, but it's happening everywhere, and this thing is following me through the prison sentence system. So I'm in prison, and on one occasion, and on one occasion I was locked up. I can't even remember the prison. I was in so many of the different prisons. They moved me frequently. I was in this one prison. It may have been, I can't remember which prison it was now, but they were just building it. And that's part of the people who, part of what we were doing was building the damn prison that we were in. And, but they had already, it was a modern, relatively modern prison. They had a place for school had been established there, but it was not being used. I would go to work, and then I would get off work, and I had begun to teach the prisoners. I was, literacy, how to read, how to write, and things like that. I had begun doing this on my own time in the prison. So I talked I guess it was a captain or something over the prison to allowing me to begin using the school that wasn't being used to teach. And so he agreed to do that. So, and he changed my job status so that I wouldn't be doing hard labor, et cetera. So I began teaching the prisoners. And it basically was surrounding literacy. But I also, I wasn't going directly into some ideological thing with them, except I was challenging how people thought and saw stuff. I would take ordinary stories that were involved in this was some of the books they had there and began to teach, and then helping the people who were reading this stuff how to interpret this, how to interpret what was being read beyond what the author had intended anything like that. And so they had sent this white guy, this white guy who was locked up. He was a well-educated white guy, prisoner. I don't know what kind of thing he was in prison for, but it was very suspicious that they sent him. And so on one morning, without warning, I was awakened and told to roll up. Now they were going to move me to a prison closer to home. I said, well, it's cool. I can do it. And they refused to allow that to happen. So they sent me to this other prison. And this might have been in Zephyr Hills. At that time in Zephyr Hills, the prison they sent me to was a road camp, and which meant that, for one thing, it was serious labor. The other thing, it meant that, I don't know how many of you may have seen this movie with this white guy, Paul Newman, called Cool Hand Luke, something like that, where the lie was that you had white people like that, but they had us in this prison, and when they first brought me to the prison, it was during working hours, and so most of the prisoners were not there in these barracks. They had these barracks, and so they had in the middle of this yard a concrete based elevation about maybe 3 feet or 4 feet high, and then this steel cage, real cage, you know, like you might keep a dog or something in, and they kept me in this cage until the workers came back to work. Meantime, I have brought all of the, my stuff with me, my books, the stuff that I could keep, and the stuff I had written, and what was supposed to be personal property. And the guy who was the captain had this stuff, right? So I'm in this cage until everybody gets back from work, and then they take me before the captain. And the captain greets me, and he has read a lot of this stuff that I'm writing. I'm keeping that I'm writing, that's my so-called personal property. And he's there with this other guy, and the guy was a psychiatrist or something like that, a psychologist that's attached to the prison. This is a road camp. And these are stone, well, I almost say stone, but stone age, like white guys. These are, Neanderthal, I can't, these are real backwoods, like guys. And the captain, he says, he brings me in and says, we're looking at the stuff you had here. And he says something about my IQ. My IQ is supposed to be high and stuff like that. And, I could be a real leader in this prison. And he's upset. And he said, and I've never seen anything like the stuff you're writing. And he turns to the guy who's a psychiatrist, who one assumes a psychologist is better educated than something, said, I've never seen anything. Have you ever seen anything like this? And the guy said, nope, never seen anything like that before, right? And so now they're scared of me, right? They got me locked up, right? I'm in the jaws of death, right? And they're afraid of me. So that's something that makes you a little nervous, right? So anyway, I was in this camp. And on one occasion, because part of what we would have to do is the road gang would go out to the interstate at these rest stops, and then these 50-gallon, this time the rest stops are relatively primitive, and they have 50-gallon drums that they use for garbage and trash, that people put their trash in. And so on one occasion, we go out, on this truck to pick up the trash at the rest stops, and we get there, and sitting on top of the trash can was a bottle of pink champagne. So we get off to get to the truck. Everybody runs for the champagne. They're drinking the champagne. You want some? Then they open the thing, and sitting on top is a purse with money in it. And they get, and the guard, the driver, the guard on the truck says, wow, my children need some shoes, and they're all sharing the money. You want some? And so even the guard takes the money. This is crazy. You know, I mean, it's so obvious that it's mind-blowing. And so when we get back to the camp, all of the armed people are standing and waiting for us to roll into the camp, right? It's a setup. And I'm supposed to be, I am the target of this thing. And so, but I'm the only one who didn't touch anything, right? And so it ends up, they got to put everybody in jail. We're in prison, they got to put everybody in jail, including the guard, except me. I mean, this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about that was happening, you know, like in the prison system itself. And there's much more that could be said about that. That's rather humorous, which is, you know, one of the reasons that I mentioned it wasn't humorous in many regards at the time, because it was really obvious what they were trying to do. And I was not supposed to leave that prison, as if it were up to the ones who were holding me there in the prison system. So I just wanted to say, you know, just that it's not just a matter of having some demonstrations and you know, that we can recount and et cetera, but there were actual life and death and intense struggles that we were involved in, learning from, growing from, and that's what's really important to understand, because some people who read some things about the movement, and most people don't even read the stuff. They read what's been written by intellectuals about it, pseudo-intellectuals about it, and they have come to various kinds of conclusions, and that makes them smarter than everybody else because they read that book. They read it in the damn book, right? And so they're smarter than everybody else, you know. But what we are talking about, and most times they read it from books by people who did not participate in struggle, right? To try to change anything. So I wanted to just say that. And I'm looking at page 157. And here it says, our commitment to the elevation of the working class to power does not come from a misguided romantic attachment to our own version of the white man's noble savage. Rather, it is due to an understanding that all value in society, all the wealth that constitutes a summation of social production stems from the labor of the workers who under capitalism never receive the value of their labor. So if you see any value in society, it comes not as a consequence of bankers or politicians or preachers or lawyers, but workers. We are the ones who create the value, et cetera, but we never get paid for it. But who gets the value? The stockbrokers, the bankers, and even the lawyers and the preachers, who are parasites in society, by the way. And I say that because they don't produce anything. They just take from those who do produce, and that's how they live. And this is a fundamental contradiction within the system of capitalism. The private ownership and control of the means of production versus the socialized production by workers who only own their capacity to work. Only thing we own is the ability to work. Get up in the morning, go to the job for the white man, up in the morning, out on the job. How does this thing go? The lucky old son is the only one who's got it made, but we have to do the work. The capitalist class owns all the wealth produced by the labor of the workers. Because of private ownership, the capitalist class monopolizes authority in society, while the workers are just so much jetsam, easily replaced from the ranks of millions of others made desperate by the fact that the product of their labor is perpetually expropriated by a non-producing parasitic ruling class. The ones who are putting up those damn responsible in St. Petersburg, Florida, as an example, for the high rises that we see, the paving on Central Avenue, all the buildings, they don't do nothing. They don't work, they don't do anything. But the working people in this community who built the city of St. Petersburg as an example, who produce all the value, and that is value that you see concentrated on Central Avenue and in those high rises, we got nothing. They have expropriated all of what should belong to us. That's where the value comes from. Jesus didn't give that to the bankers and the real estate people. This was stuff that we produce, right? But they have authority over us because they have collected, grabbed the value that we created as their own value, and there are only a handful of them, right? And the majority of us have to do without. The African liberation sought by African internationalism is a liberation that will empower the working class and resolve the contradiction in society revolving around private ownership and socialized production. African internationalism means black power to the African working class. African internationalism means black power to the African working class. It means elevation of the African working class to the position of ruling class. The black liberation movement of the 1960s was crushed before the various contending political and ideological lines within the movement could develop fully and play themselves out on the political battlefield of revolutionary ideas. As I said, our movement was crushed and destroyed before a lot of the different arguments and debates about what was the revolution was about could be resolved. They didn't get resolved like that because the movement was crushed, right? So these contending ideas didn't have a way to play themselves out, but we were not crushed. And we continued to develop as a party. And even the period of time that I was talking about in jail contributed to that development. And it was not just my experience, it was the experience of this party, this movement, this revolution. That's why we are having this discussion right now. And so we say our party represents a revolutionary continuum, linking the immediate past of defeat with the present and future. We were never a part of the defeat. We were born as a revolutionary organization that simply moved from one level of struggle to another higher level of struggle. And that's really important for us to understand. So the imperialist U.S. colonialist state never succeeded in driving us completely underground and out of active political life. Although one party co-founder was assassinated and I was frequently imprisoned, the ideological questions littering the bloodied battlefield of counter-revolutionary repression did not go unattended. We rescued, resuscitated, and resolved them through the ongoing work of our party. Consequently, the development of our theory and political line was continuous and benefited from our uninterrupted practice in solving the real problems of the revolution. I'm just going to mention a couple of other things, and then I'm going to open it up just for further discussion. And I felt like it's really important to, even as we're talking about specific periods of resistance and struggle, I think the foundation, this is part of what I'm talking about, the foundation one of this discussion, why we should even have this discussion, why this discussion is significant, as opposed to the events that we often go to and we hear people waxing, so intellectually highbrowed, about what happened in the past. It doesn't have any essence to it because it's not born out of the resistance and actual struggle of the people. So here on page 160, Jomo and the birth of the African People's Socialist Party. Just a couple of things about that. The Uhuru movement preceded the organization of the party. In 1966, when I was an organizer for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee based in St. Petersburg, Florida, we launched the demonstration that resulted in the defiant removal of a hideous 8-by-4-foot racially demeaning mural that had hung on the wall of the City Hall for more than 30 years. 1968, from a prison cell where I was serving time on felony charges stemming from taking down the mural, and during the thick of the Black Revolution of the 60s, I formed the Hunter of Militant Organizations, or JOMO. JOMO was the Florida-based leader of the African workers movement that bore some resemblance to the Black Panther Party that had arisen on the west coast of the United States in that period. The Black Panther Party and JOMO emerged on the scene at an important historical intersection when the interests of the African working class rose up inside the movement that had up until then been dominated by the interests of the African petty bourgeoisie, middle class, uppity Negroes, or some people I've heard refer to them as the uppity poor. They don't say uppity poor, they say the uppity poor, which resonates a lot better. So we say that SNCC, the militant wing of the struggle for democratic rights, led by mostly young, student-based Africans, was the crucible in this class struggle, transforming the movement from one primarily for reform, to an anti-colonial movement for black power. Black power. And we go through the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, which built the Black Panther Party in Lowndes County, Alabama. And then, we talk about 1972, how Jomo joined together because there's an ongoing process. This is an ongoing process to solve the problems of the revolution. So it becomes clear to some of us that, one, that protest politics is not enough. You just can't go around protesting stuff. What the hell? You just protest. So we say that we had to have a movement that was about really capturing political power, capturing and wielding, capturing and exercising, capturing and using political power. And what kind of organization do we have to have? And we said that we understood that the most significant organization for really capturing and utilizing or wielding political power was the political party. And so that's what led to the efforts that Jomo initiated early on to build a political party. First, we were looking at a Florida-based political party, and then the government had all kinds of snitches and informants and people who disrupted that process. And then later on, 1972, with the Florida Black Rights Fighters out of Fort Myers, and I hope Comrade Vince Lawrence is participating in this study, and with the Gainesville Black Studies Group, we came together first to build for the African Liberation Day demonstration, the first ALD, African Liberation Demonstration, to happen on May 27th. It happened on May 27th, 1972 in Washington, D.C. And so we were organizing in the state of Florida. I was on the national coordinating committee to build that. And so through this process, the Gainesville study group, the Florida Black Rights Fighters, and Jomo came together to form the African People's Socialist Party. And almost immediately, the war against us was escalated. Comrade Lawrence Mann, I don't think lasted more than a few months. He was the leader of the Florida Black Rights Fighters out of Fort Myers before he was killed in a mysterious car crash. And then I think maybe the next month, Couture Carey, which is recorded in this political report, but Couture Carey, who was over the Gainesville Black Study Group in Gainesville, Florida, came under attack by a counterinsurgency movement that was led by this guy who was on the city council, but who had been a counterinsurgency expert with the United States government. And they moved on her, got her fired from her job, and eventually she even had to leave the state. And then within a few months of that, if that long, maybe the next month, I was re-imprisoned on the mural charge. So they came at us with a vengeance that we were not supposed to be here having this discussion today. And this is why it's so important for us to talk about it, because we are here, because we did have the experience, because we did survive, because we did learn from it, and because they were unable to disrupt the African National Liberation Movement precisely because we survived. And when I say the African National Liberation Movement, I mean that exactly. I don't mean the St. Petersburg or the Florida of the U.S. I mean the African National Liberation Movement. I'm talking about they've killed Lumumba, but Lumumba is in our work. The Congo is in our work. They kill, revolutionaries in various other places around the world, but we are, this movement, this party has been responsible for putting us on the ground in South Africa and Kenya and various other places on the continent of Africa and other places outside of the United States. So that's the kind of work that we've done, and that's the significance of the African People's Socialist Party surviving this war that they made against us. They killed Che, but Che lives. They killed Fred Hampton, but Fred lives. They killed Malcolm, Martin Luther King. All of this, we have been able to take the experiences and take the lessons that were taught to us by these forces, not just individuals, but the movements that they represented. And now that is a part of the fabric of the African People's Socialist Party. And it is not some fabric that we just got from classrooms and stuff like that. We have constantly, historically, been engaged in struggle, as you will see when you read this. And I've talked a long time now. In 1970, Chimmering, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to contribute to this.
Yeah, just one thing. I think it's also important to talk about the internationalism of the African People's Socialist Party. And I think one of the greatest examples of that was the 1979 Gainesville, Florida demonstration in support of the Iranian people after the so-called hostage crisis, as the U.S. media was calling it, when Iranian students took over the U.S. embassy in Tehran. And that demonstration probably made national news. International news, because it probably was not happening anywhere else where Africans were actually supporting the Iranian people. And we came under attack for that. And then a second demonstration after the first demonstration was attacked. And I thought it was one of the greatest examples of, at great risk of physical harm, and it was a real statement of solidarity to the Iranian people. And I thought that is a great example of our forces in our movement, and everybody else should go back and look at that kind of internationalism as a real example of the kind of internationalism that all organizations should be participating in.
In 1972, Couture Carey was responsible for our connection with the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, that was leading the revolutionary movement to overthrow white power in what was called Rhodesia. And then shortly after that, our party began to work closely with the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania in South Africa. I'm not talking we wrote, statements to each other and stuff. We actually participated. We put people, for example, we actually put a person in the ZANU office in the United Nations. At the United Nations, we had somebody working in that office. And we participated in debates and struggles at the United Nations, demonstrations, what have you, around the struggle of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. We participated in the debates that they had, whether they should accept the negotiated settlement that resulted in this stuff they have in South Africa today that continues to repress the African working class. And then Chimurenga mentioned in 1979, because we are anti-imperialists, we have always been. In 1979, when Iranian students, by now when Iranian students seized the U.S. embassy in Tehran, the capital of Iran, and this Iran is the place where the United States government had overthrown the elected official in Iran in 1954-55, and had overthrown this guy and then put in his place, and they overthrew him because he was talking about nationalizing the oil, because you had, might have been British Petroleum, but some of the major oil corporations, they were taking all this oil out of Iran, and the Iranian people were only getting 16% of the value from the oil that they were taking. So Mossadegh, who was no flaming revolutionary at all, was talking about nationalizing the oil so the damn Iranian people could have access to their own oil. And then the United States government overthrew Mossadegh and put this tyrant in place, that the Shah, and then armed him to the teeth, so that not only was he a horrible repressor of the people of Iran, but he became their policeman in the Persian Gulf, that whole area. and the Persian Gulf. The state of this illegitimate white nationalist state of Israel, who the United States government armed to the teeth. They were going to control all of the oil and petroleum interests of white power there. That was their job. And in both cases, it's really interesting because most people don't understand it, but Iranians are not Arabs. You see, they're Persians. And because they were not Arabs, the U.S. and the other imperialist forces felt confident that they could use them to control the Arabs. And the Jewish state, the white nationalist Jewish state, is not Arab. It's a handful of white people who are armed to the teeth. And so together, these non-Arab people in the middle of a sea of Arabs, these states were supposed to control this whole area of the Middle East and the Persian Gulf. And that's how that was supposed to work. And then the students took it, and the young people took the embassy. And this is, of course, on the back end. Anyway, when they did, you have this white nationalist fervor in this country, in the United States, that were sometimes even killing. They killed some Arabs because they couldn't tell anybody with a turban or anybody, Arab, kill them. And on the University of Florida, which is the big-time school, state-run school in the state of Florida, you had rallies, like bonfires, that were, talking about stuff like send the Klan to Iran and sand niggers go home. They were talking about the Iranians or Arabs, anybody, sand niggers go home. That's how they were characterizing them and what have you. And so, we were definitely obligated to respond to that. We had to respond. Anytime, if white people get together and start lynching, we are the ones they started on. And there's no way in hell you can watch mobs of white people roaming the streets talking about killing people and stuff like that and not intervene. Or you open yourself up to the worst kinds of things on the one hand. On the other hand, we recognize that the Iranian people, if they were a bone in the throat of white power, then they were somebody who we needed to be united with. And so that's how we took that on, and that's absolutely correct. That was one of the more important struggles that we got involved in, was this thing. And on the first time, we had a demonstration in Gainesville, Florida. We called a demonstration, and I don't remember how many of us, but there was a lot. And this was really impressive because a lot of Africans, came out, and we stood in solidarity with the Iranian people, and we marched. And then we marched till we got to University Avenue, and then we turned down University Avenue, heading to the main square, and there were thousands of flag-waving white people waiting for us. And I was not in that demonstration. But when our forces got closer, the white mob attacked our demonstration. They destroyed the red, black, and green flag that was leading it. And it made international news, right? And then we got these criticisms from these black nationalists, particularly in New York, saying, we shouldn't have been marching. And then we let them tear up the flag, and the Iranians are white people any damn way, et cetera, et cetera. This was the kind of response we got. So I said, we got to march again, And so the next week, we said, we called a press conference and said, we're marching again. And the black preachers came out and against the march, and they preached from the pulpits, asking Africans not to join this march with us. And so we marched. We end up marching, and when we get University Avenue again, not only the white people there, but there are motorcycle gangs and stuff, and they've been sitting around waiting for us. They've been drinking beer along with the cops. The cops and the motorcycle gangs are sitting around drinking beer. So we turn, and then there they are again, and they're shouting, America, 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 and waving the U.S. flags. And so there were a couple of cars in the parade, and I forget, I was marching behind one of the cars, and when the car turned on University Avenue and saw all these white people, mobs of thousands of white people, and the car stopped. And I was behind, and I kicked the the back bumper of the car, keep going. And so we marched into this mob of white people, frothing at the mouth, lynch mob and what have you. They were chanting, America, America. And then I initiated the chant, Africa. And we just walked straight up into them and Africa, 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 and walked straight through them. And then they stopped chanting for a minute, and then I got up on this makeshift platform and started speaking. And what was mind-blowing is they all got quiet while I spoke. They all shut up while I spoke, right? And I finished speaking, got down, and then one of the guys who was leading the cops said something, well, you know, we were only supposed to come this far with you. I said, you know, I cussed him and said, well, leave. You know, what the hell? And because we kept moving and we stopped, but they couldn't leave. So they following us, and we're going into the African community, and these white people chanting Africa, America, America, waving the flag, some of them even on trucks. And time we crossed over into the African community, Africans start coming out of the clubs and bars and stuff like that. It was so funny because they said, you're not in America now. When they were saying America, America, they said, you're not in America now. And they came out of the bars and stuff like that. And when they came out, and they were pissed, and they were riled up, and then you saw white people running, right? You know, the trucks with the American flag flying in the wind as they were getting out of there. And that's when the cops pulled out pepper spray. Now they're going to pepper spray the Africans who come out to defend the Africans who were there. But that was a remarkable kind of event. We developed a deep relationship with the Iranian movement throughout that entire process. Yeah, that was good mentioning. But that's part of the stuff that forged us. I mean, we'll never forget Mufunda Lake. We were talking about Mufunda before we started this discussion. Mufunda Lake, who died in prison, who spent most of his life in prison, from Birmingham, Alabama, who was first identified in Birmingham, Alabama as a young person on the streets, you know, but who participated also in that civil rights stuff that was going on in Birmingham, and he died in prison. But I'll never forget the picture, because Mufunda was with us in Gainesville, and there was this little African child who was on a skateboard, and he had joined us, and he was on his skateboard with a demonstration. And when the mobs of white people came, the African child, he must have been 9 or 10 years old, maybe 12. You know, he got his skateboard like this, and Mufunda is wrestling with the kid to take the skateboard because Mufunda wants to use the skateboard as a weapon. You know, it's just, you know, one of those things that help us to, you know, have defined, you know, ourselves and over a period of time. So I'm going to stop for now. And like I said, 1976, 4 years after the founding of the African People's Socialist Party, before then, this process had begun by a kind of coalition that included the Puerto Rican Socialist Party and an organization called Mass Party for Impact, Mass Party for something. This was a Mass Party Organizing Committee. Yeah, this was a group of white people, some of them elderly, former members of the Communist Party USA and other kinds of liberals. And they were, this was 1976 was what they call a year of the bicentennial, 200 years after, you know, the founding, I guess, after the theft. It was 1776. What was significant about 1776? Declaration.
American Revolution.
The American Revolution. So, so they had this. They were during the bicentennial. It was during a period too where America was experiencing severe crisis because struggles of peoples around the world, people taking this stuff back, and that would, you know, would result in what happened in 1979 in Iran and what have you. So there was a real struggle that was going on. So the United States was really pumping up. Vietnam, you know, had occurred and was occurring, and America was trying to pump up patriotism among the white people here. So they had this bicentennial thing. It was crazy. Fire hydrants were painted red, white, and blue. The curbs on the streets painted red, white, and blue. They were really pumping this American patriotism. And so this group came forward with a slogan of a bicentennial without colonies. And for us, it was important because the colonial question, people had effectively smashed the colonial question. The fact that African people are colonized, not fighting against racism, but colonialism. And that was something that we were deeply involved in trying to win people to recognize, because we're not fighting to change the minds or the opinions or the feelings of white people, but to take power. And that's the struggle against colonialism. When a foreign and alien power dominates your life, takes over your life, that's a colonialism, that we are a colony. And so when they said a bicentennial without colonies, we thought we could participate in this in a fashion that would be able to push the colonial question out further into the world so that it was one that embraced our condition as African people in this country as well. So we participated in that thing. And many people, North Americans and white people who had been over the years, since the 1960s, had some relationship with JOMO, with the Uhuru movement, et cetera, and now with the African People's Socialist Party, we call on everybody to participate and go into that thing, and we did. And coming out of that, it became clear that we had to move, beyond that, and we called for these North Americans to come to St. Petersburg, Florida. That was in July that this thing happened. So and then it was in September, wasn't it? September of 1976, we had these forces coming into St. Petersburg, Florida, to build the African People's Solidarity Committee. And so I'll stop there. And Penny Hess was one of the people who came, who answered that call and came into St. Petersburg. Uhuru, Penny.
Uhuru, Chairman. Uhuru. Well, I just really want to salute you, Chairman, and the leadership that you have provided not only, to the African Revolution, but to the entire world, including to North Americans, to white people, wherever we are. And I also want to salute the courage of that particular demonstration that you're talking about in Gainesville. Just that, that you just went right into this mob. Right into them. In the middle of a mob of...
Yeah, we ain't scared.
Yeah, it would be like and just gave this amazing presentation. And I just salute that and all the leadership and just have the honor of being in the African People's Solidarity Committee, the organization of white people under the leadership of the party for all these years, since the very beginning. And, I was thinking about, the 1970s was a time, following and a continuation of this resounding defeat, this assault on the African liberation movement inside the US and around the world. But it was also a time when the dust hadn't quite settled yet. So all of the ideas of revolution hadn't been wiped out, and in part because Vietnam won in 1975. That was it. The U.S. had to leave, or maybe it was 76, and then going on in the same period were the struggles in Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Cape Verde. These were on headlines in the newspapers around the world, and the struggle in Iran, the struggle of Nicaragua, El Salvador, all of these were, this is what was in the newspapers. And of course the Palestinians, and every front, there was revolution around the world, and that counterinsurgency against, the revolutions around the world had not been fully, informed yet.
Make a note, because one of the things, though, that was significant about this period is that it was almost a deafening silence inside the United States.
Yes.
Because they had crushed the revolutionary movement here. They had killed Lumumba. They had overthrown Nkrumah. And so even though we had these other manifestations of struggle in different places around the world, what was fast disappearing was a revolutionary movement of African people that would have an impact on the situation. So you had people who were sympathetic to what was happening in Cape Verde and what was happening in Angola and all these people. In fact, 1972, that's when you saw the first African Liberation Day mobilization happen. But by now, the Panthers are almost dead. And much of the other revolutionary movement is gone. So even the African Liberation Day mobilization was done by radical sector, at best, radical African petty bourgeois forces, not the revolutionary. In fact, many of the people who participated in making ALD were, and who became quote unquote revolutionaries by now, are people who hated the revolution, the black revolution, when it was happening in the 1960s. You with me? Yeah, that was the reality that we were confronted with. And in fact, we are the only ones who summed up the defeat of the revolution. Because if you don't understand the revolution that was defeated, then what you see happening in succeeding years, years that follow, seems to be a part of the same continuum. And it was not a part of the same continuum. You know, history, didn't stop. Yeah, go ahead, comrade. Yeah.
That, and I just want to say as a little parenthesis that the chapter 3 of the Vanguard, the new political report, which you deepened prior to publication, is incredible to show that the party was the only one out there defining the question of counterinsurgency and keeping the revolution alive. And that's why in the middle of this defeat, it was electrifying to encounter the party and to, and to see just the science and brilliance that you were putting out. And so, when I met the party in 1976 in the summer, because you came to Louisville, Kentucky, I think in August, and you had an event, the party had an event at the YMCA in Louisville in the African community, in a little room upstairs, actually not a little room, but in a room upstairs, and it was incredible. So I was just whatever, I found it, and I came to that, and it forever changed my life. And prior to that, I had lived in France for 2 years, and it was a time when two things. One is that a lot of African people were in, quote, exile in France at that time, escaping the counterinsurgency. Eldridge Cleaver was there. I never met him, but there were a lot of other Africans, but not only from the US, but African people from all over the world. And it was very, it was just a time, I don't know, there was really a sense of revolution. And also what happened was, I worked for a rich family, and they lived in this condo, whatever, and it was in a really posh area, which was the area where the embassies were. And I had they give you a little room that's called the maid's quarters in the top floor, and I was living up there. And so to get to there, actually, who lived in that building was the Vietnamese man who was the negotiator for the Vietnamese Revolution. And it was the area where the embassies are. So one day, and I knew nothing about this, but one day when I was coming back to where I was staying, I couldn't get through because there was this massive demonstration. And it was mostly the white left and unions. And I didn't find out about opportunism till later, the opportunism of the French left. The chairman informed me in the party. But it was at least 50 or 60,000 people or more in huge things. Every union, every school, every kind of group carrying huge banners saying solidarity with the victory of Vietnam. And it was very moving. It was very moving to see, and also just reading the newspapers and trying to learn French, so I would read the French newspaper Le Monde, which is not a revolutionary paper, but it has its struggles with the U.S. And I would read the English paper, the Herald Tribune, which is a CIA paper, and try to compare it. And the French paper would be, just talking about the victory, the exuberance of the people of Vietnam, versus the American paper would say that people were crying and everything when the Americans left. And just, it talked about Angola, Mozambique, and all these struggles in a positive way. And so, there was a kind of consciousness. And when I came back, I was able to find the party because I just had this sense that the struggle of African people in the U.S. was the key thing. And even though I couldn't analyze that or say that in a certain way, but I did feel, a sense of that. And so when I saw the party and I came to this event in Louisville, Kentucky in 1976, and I came upstairs and all the African women and the men had beautiful, African clothes on. I remember that. And there were all kinds of banners and different things up. And there was a little red, one of those red record players, and, from back in the day, and they were playing some, maybe, maybe John Coltrane or, some kind of jazz. And I just remember, it was just so vivid. It was like, wow, this is something incredible. And the chairman was getting ready to speak, and he had a huge map of Africa. And when he spoke, you went through every single country in Africa. And you said, this is the state of revolution or neocolonialism or what happened in every country. And I was just like, wow, this is so amazing. And and then at the end of the event, the person I was with introduced me to you. And you asked me, well, what did I think of the French left? And I said, oh, I think it's great. And then you yelled to Kay Fing across the room, oh, she thinks the French left is great, ha ha ha. And I'll never forget that. But anyway, that was the education, my education part of it. So you announced that that the party was forming the African People's Solidarity Committee a few months later, and who was going to come. And I was like, I will. And, and it was just, I feel also that it was the things, when I came to that conference, which was here in St. Petersburg, and which was at a church, I think on 22nd Avenue South, or
26th, I think.
26th Avenue South, it was at a church.
No, it's on 22nd.
It's on 22nd?
Yeah, it's on 22nd.
Okay.
It was on 22nd, and we went there, and I just felt the seriousness, the discipline of the party. And the chairman gave a presentation on dialectical materialism that was 13 hours long. And I was just really moved by the science of it, the seriousness of it, the discipline, the party, and the internationalism that Chimurenga mentioned was always there. The party was the first to be in solidarity with any other oppressed and colonized people around the world, and whatever it took. And that, there was a sense of history for me at that conference. And when I think about the significance of the party and of you solving the problems of the revolution, and that this question of white people was a key problem, because how could, either if you rely on the question of racism, then the party couldn't win. African people couldn't win liberation fighting racism. And the party, you had already written the pamphlet called Colonialism is the Main Problem Facing African People in the US. You had already written that by the time you formed APSC. So this question that African people inside the U.S. where a colony was already there. And, you know, just the fact that white people, if we wanted to be revolutionary, had to be under the leadership of the African Revolution, because we sit on the pedestal of slavery and genocide, and everything that we have, you know, comes from that. And this was so profound, and it did evolve and deepen over the years in struggles with APSC and with the white left. And you know, I just salute that, because I remember a long time ago, or maybe when I was first coming into the movement, I was asking Kay Fing about this pamphlet of colonialism, and just to say, you know, say more about it, like how did that develop? And I just remember him telling me that African people were so happy to learn that the problem was colonialism. And I feel that for white people too, it can make you happy, because this can be defeated. And so many, and there is a way that white people can be redeemed, but it has to be under the leadership of the African Revolution, because we will always go to opportunism. We will always sell out the African liberation movement and oppressed and colonized people, just like the French did. French Communist Party did to the people of Algeria and Vietnam until the very end. And you know that this is the future. And it's just, when it was laid out, it was like, well, yes, this can happen. This can happen. You know, it can be, and it just needs people to carry out this. And I would say that for me, you know, it took a while for APSC to really congeal in a certain way, and to gel, and to really be what it needed to be. And it took a lot of struggle by the party with APSC to be, and almost 10 years, and into the 80s. And for us to really grasp the question of parasitic capitalism and the question of reparations and our relationship to the resources and to reparations to African people. But you know, that it was still, nevertheless, so clarifying and so clear that it was brilliant. You know, it was just brilliant. It was the only force that did that, and it's the only force today that can analyze parasitic capitalism, that can analyze the true relationship of white people as the colonizer nation against, you know, working with the U.S. state against, as part of the U.S. state, as you've said, fighting and killing and torturing African people, lynching, living off at the expense of African people. And I think that we're in a period now where so many white people, there are so many white people who want to take the stand. They want to know what to do, and they can see the dead end of anti-racism, because where can you go with that? But with this, with the African People's Solidarity Committee and the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, white people can redeem ourselves, because we can be stand on the side. We can be part of the African Revolution under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, with our job to go into the white community, unleash the resources, and turn them back over. And you know, just for that period of the 1970s, the party, there was no, you know, the party just survived the counterinsurgency as a beacon, not only to the African Revolution, but to everybody on this planet. Because where would people be today? Where would the world be without the African People's Socialist Party? It would be believing everything that the colonial narrative puts out, and only the party and you have stood for that. So the 1970s was incredibly important in terms of the formation of the African People's Socialist Party, the ability of the party to sum up counterinsurgency, colonialism, parasitic capitalism, white opportunism, all of this, and how to solve it and move forward. And you know, I can only say what an incredible honor to have been able to be there, you know, to be in these struggles that the party was waging and you were waging every single day inside the US, in solidarity with every single force, the Palestinians, the Iranians, the Nicaraguans, the Vietnamese, all of whom had the greatest regard for you, wanted you to be their leader. They were like, well, we need a leader like you. You know, it's profound. And I can only, I'm very humbled and very honored to have been there and to be there here today and to see the victory, you know, the 7th Congress, the leadership of the chairman, and the party is winning. It started, you know, so much happened in the 1970s to create the foundation of that.
Yeah, I want to thank Penny for that intervention. Penny has played an important role in this process, specifically as it relates to the founding of APSC and the leadership she has provided, you know, like on that front. I cannot overstate that because it has taken a tremendous amount of courage to do what she's done. We broke all the rules. When APSC was founded, was created, the flack that came at APSC, at the party, from black nationalists who attacked us because of this relation. I never forget when we, this was later on even, when we organized the first reparations tribunal in New York. That would have been in 1982, even as late as 1982. This guy who was the vice president of the provisional government of the Republic of New Africa, first of all, came to ask me how could we even have a tribunal on reparations without getting permission from the president of the provisional government of the Republic of New Africa. And then one of the things then said that how could we, they were opposed to it because there were Africans from the continent who were serving as judges in this tribunal, second. And thirdly, they were opposed to it because if we got some money, the white people who were a part of the APSC would get the money. I mean, this was the kind of stuff we were running into, and we were, there was a whole undercurrent, underground slander that was always working toward us because of the relationship with the African People's Solidarity Committee, or the founding of the APSC. And it was like really playing on and trying to take advantage of obvious suspicions that Africans have about white people. It's normal, natural, and it's obvious. But the party, what we have always tried not to do is just tell the masses that we have to provide leadership. When everybody was for Barack Hussein Obama, all the black people, oh, they Obama this, Obama that, and then how can you come out against Obama and say everybody, all the black people love him? Well, what the hell? You know, if you get addicted, you'll love cocaine too. Do we just say everybody doing cocaine, let's do it? You know, no. Somewhere leadership has to emerge. And that's what we talk about when we say we are historical materialists. We are dialecticians. We see the connection that we have with the whole world. You can't say that black people are in a struggle separate from the relationship of any other people. You can't, if there are white people in the world, and there are, that's how we experience oppression. And if there's a sector of the white population that could be won to uniting with the struggle to overturn white power, you'd be a fool not to do that. It's just illogical. It doesn't, I don't care what your sentiment may be in terms of whether you like white people or not. It's got nothing to do with it. It's how do we get out of this? And then once you know, like we said, you know, in the process of trying to change the world, one becomes changed too. And we began to learn things in this process. Because at one point, we were probably heavy on the strategic significance of this relationship. But we also had to come to terms with the fact that we had to explain it beyond just some practical strategic thing. You got to go beyond that, otherwise it makes you as cynical as the bourgeoisie. Okay, we got this relationship with white people, and I remember this great black leader, whose name I won't call now, who was asked how he had been married to a white woman, and he said something like, you know, if you get a cow, you milk it. And I thought that was the most cynical, obscene thing that somebody could say. This has nothing to do with how one thinks about white people and whether white people should be married to African people. How could you say this? This woman had babies with you, you slept with this woman, and you're going to make her a cow that you milk? I mean, what is this? What is this, an obscenity? So you can't have that kind of cynical approach. If you say that it's legitimate to have this relationship, you got to be able to validate that relationship. You've got to have the basis and theory or something to explain why would you have this relationship. Otherwise, it makes you just as the bourgeoisie. You're some kind of cynical force. And we understood that as hard as it has come to accept this reality for many people, white people are human beings. Despite the notion that they're the devil, and despite the notion from, this one person that they were some kind of mutations that really not human beings, white people they're not mysterious. This is the thing. White people appear mysterious to us. And if you can't understand white people are human beings, then you can't understand how to defeat them. You can't defeat, okay, they're the devil. The devil is this entity, supposed entity that's like godly. It's some creature that, how do you defeat God, something from God? And that is one of the lines too, having to do, with that. And mutations. Okay, you say somebody, they're mutants, right? So the thing is, even, you know how you know the stuff is not valid? Because it can't just explain the world. It has to inform how to change the world. If the only thing you can do is explain this to me, but you can't tell me how knowing this is going to help me to change it, then I don't want to hear it. I really don't want to hear it. I mean, you can build a whole bunch of churches every place. Well, it's the devil is coming. Maybe that's why there's so many black churches in the African community, because of the devil, except that's not the case, because if you go to the church, you see on the walls the devil is also up there as God, Jesus, the Son of God. So I don't know how you get around that. But I think it's really important to come to terms, like Kay Fing was saying, that it's a thrilling thing now, because we're not in this dead-end trap of racism. So you got to spend all your life on your knees, getting white people to like you. Because it's racism. Don't sag, don't talk like this, don't act like this, because it's not how white society would have you act. And so, it's colonialism. We have to have power of our own lives. And,
It's liberating for white people too.
Yeah, it has to be.
Because it shows the way out. It shows that Africans can win, and that this whole system that gives us the relationship, that puts us in this situation to have this, colonizer relationship to African people, can be changed. And it's not about sitting around thinking, it's actively changing the world under the leadership of a revolutionary movement and carrying out our task, which is to go into the white community and win other people. And it's very exciting. I just see, so many comrades from APSC come to life in this, and it transforms us in such a powerful way. It's beautiful. It's the world. It shows the world. I feel like the existence of the party shows the world, and you're like, this is the world I want to be part of. It's just everything. The culture, the internationalism, the feeling that you're with the whole world, and that that this white power, this imperialism, parasitism is going to go. And people created it, and people will end it, and it will be African working class. That leads that.
Is it going to go? If you, in African internationalism, you can see how it is going.
Yes,
it is happening. I mean, right before your very eyes. And this is the thing that frightens some people. Some Africans who are supposed to be revolutionaries and all this are frightened by events that's happening in the world that really respond to the crisis of imperialism. That this thing is in a crisis. When it gets in a crisis, it acts a certain way. Mm-hmm. In the same way, people probably in this room are too young to have had the experience of seeing a dog that might be hit by a car or harmed some other ways, and you come to try to help the dog, and the dog would actually, try to attack you because it's frightened and hurt. Well, that's the way imperialism, and it will bite you. Your dog will bite you under those circumstances, and imperialism acts that way too. And if you don't know what you're looking at is a wounded animal, that's the reason it's attacking. You can be so frightened because this thing is just attacking. And give it a good kick, or look at it and treat it differently, you see it's dying. And these are death throes that you're looking at. And this is what we need to be able to understand. But what we've seen in the past, though, is imperialism has a tremendous amount of resilience. And so we've seen this is an extended crisis that we experience. And we've been talking about this crisis for a long time because it's real. And how do you know the crisis is real? Because you've seen the world change. You've seen the crisis. You've seen them try to repair the thing. They come back briefly, but the world has already been changed even before they come back. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. There are movements against colonialism that have succeeded, even if you have now neocolonialism. Neocolonialism is not what white power desires. Neocolonialism is what white power desired. It's only neocolonialism is a fallback position. At the time where masses of African people rise up, people around the world saying, kill the white man, etc., the white man disappears and now comes in a black face. It's not what they wanted to do. They wanted absolute control. But neocolonialism, so we've seen neocolonialism emerge in the world and what have you. The world is changing. The crisis of imperialism is real and it's deep and profound at this very moment. But what has to happen to take it over is that we have to have a revolutionary party, not some party that's bogged down in ridiculous bourgeois sentiments and stuff like that, that keeps it from being able to see the future or keeps it from being able to fight for what has to happen, locked up into the sentiments that's provided for us by the ruling class. It's like Christmas and Santa Claus, you know what I mean? Don't tell the children that Santa Claus is not real. You keep pretending that it's real, even though this Santa that you're talking about is robbing the black community every damn day. You better tell somebody it's real so that they can be armed to stop this thug when he comes through snatching up your stuff to take it, these other places. And so we want to expose contradictions. We want to deepen the crisis of imperialism, but we have to have the party, and we have to have forces in the party committed primarily to that, not to their own self-serving, egotistical interests, that makes them feel good. What is going to kill this monster? 1. 2, every legitimate force in the world that's concerned about overturning imperialist white power needs to join or support the African People's Socialist Party. It's that simple. It's that simple. We don't need a lot of single interest kind of thing just running around doing their own little thing and what have you, or small circles doing this and doing that. When the party is 46 years old, with a tremendous reach all around the world, are respected by forces even if they don't like us, around the world. And this is what we have to have. We have to have this magnificent, huge revolutionary army of the working class that can take us to the future. And that's an obligation to everybody, as opposed to this little thing that make you feel good because now your name is up in lights and you can do this and you can hold an event. The thing that makes the party so significant is that what you will see everywhere we've ever worked, peoples and communities get involved in it. We involve communities and peoples in the work. That's the struggle that we've always been involved in. Look at what we're doing in St. Louis now. It's not just having an event in St. Louis or just trying to have an event in St. Petersburg. It's when we get a radio station to win the participation of people into it. And we've always said it can't work unless the people are involved. It has to become an institution of the masses of our people and to take us forward. The role of the party is to provide the leadership. That's why we said the advanced detachment. Anyway, Uhuru. So is there anything else that should be raised, or are there any questions, anything that people are raising that we might be able to address, and is there time to do that?
Uhuru. Yes, there is time, and we want everybody who is watching on the live stream right now to go ahead and address your questions, concerns, comments, anything to the panel. We have Chairman Omali Yeshitela himself. We have Comrade Chimaranga Slimbao and Chairwoman Penny Hess of the African People's Solidarity Committee, and really want to appreciate this discussion. This is the opportunity right now to ask your questions, these burning questions, and also your comments. We have comments coming in on the live stream, and before we really depart from the question of the African People's Solidarity Committee, which is where we left off, there was a question from Comrade Kobina, because we heard about, just the backlash that the party faced with the forming of an APSC, and the strategy, the basis of the strategy for forming APSC. And Comrade Kobina, who's a Southern Regional Representative, wanted to know, how was, or APSC and the strategy in terms of contending with these other white organizations that claimed too that they were for black people or black power. And he mentioned such things like Prairie Fire. Wanted to talk about that.
You want to? Go ahead.
You mean about the groups?
Well, the kind of slang. Whatever generosity or charity that they wanted to bestow upon us. And at the moment, what was a really critical question, especially coming out of the 1960s, after the Black Revolution had been defeated, black people speaking for ourselves was not supposed to happen. So there were some organizations that made careers of speaking for black people. Prayer Fire Organizing Committee, May 19 in New York, and then there were other so-called solidarity groups that built themselves because they became, we in jail, we dead, and so they become the spokespersons for the African movement and African revolution. So the minute we rise up, then we are a threat to their prestige, their place in the world. And then what we're saying is if you genuinely want to be in solidarity with the African revolution, then you don't set the terms for what that means. We set the terms, and what we do is we've created an African People's Solidarity Committee that works directly under our leadership. This is where we want to go. If you're really honest about wanting to support African liberation, then you join our organization. You join our organization that's led by us, by the colonized people. Join the African People's Solidarity Committee. Any honest white leftist that's really trying to deal with this question then has to join APSC. But we've learned even more than that. Any honest revolutionary that's interested in overturning the socialist system itself then recognizes the critical question is the African liberation movement. Therefore, the Advanced Detachment, the Vanguard of that movement, calls the shot. You don't join with the say, I want to support the Vietnamese, but I'm going to tell them how they should make the revolution. But I have seen that. I have seen white people in Nicaragua who have been called in Nicaragua by the Nicaraguan revolutions and have told the white people, this is what we need. And I've seen people stand up and say, nope, that's not what you need. Here's what you need. These are white people from the United States. So you don't set those kind of terms. We set the terms. And that's something that white people have a problem dealing with, whether they call themselves leftists or whether they call themselves trumpets or anything like that. The question that black people will set the terms for this relationship is difficult for them to deal with, on the one hand. And so there was a certain kind of slander about APSC, and then we were the weird ones. APSC was the weirdest organization. We were weird, et cetera, but that's changed tremendously. Today, we set the terms and the standards for what that relationship should be. That's the thing that we have today, and that's part of what has transformed. You were going to say something.
Well, I just wanted to say on that, Chairman, because the Prairie Fire, and they were the ones that came out of the line of SDS and Weather Underground.
SDS
students,
Go ahead.
Students for Democratic Society. That was sort of the leading white force, the revolutionary so-called force. The New Left, that's right, the New Left, and then this so-called Weather Underground, and then Prairie Fire Organizing Committee on the West Coast, and May 19th on the East Coast, and that the party began working with some forces that were recruited to APSC in San Francisco, but Prairie Fire was in the work around to free Desi Woods, and that's a whole other thing that we haven't talked about yet. But so you came to San Francisco, I think you were in and out, but you had this defining speech that we always call the February 18th speech of, was it 1978? I think it was 1978. And you spoke, and Prairie Fire was all there, and a lot of people were there, a lot of white people were there.
About 300 people, if I'm not mistaken.
And yeah, it was at a school, and and basically at that presentation, you set the terms for this relationship in a really profound way that immediately drew the lines, and that played out in practice. And by the way, I hope that that speech could be studied at one of these Sunday studies, because it is just so powerful. Yeah. But you set the terms for that relationship, and there is no Prairie Fire Organizing Committee today. There is no May 19th today. They're gone, they're dead. And, you know.
I called for their death.
Yes, you
for
did.
That.
Use that. And it's because of the party. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was a powerful struggle, though.
Yeah. The struggle got so heated that they had a lot of influence with prison-related Africans, because after the Black Revolution had been defeated, we had all these Africans, many of whom had been revolutionaries, up in the prison systems. And we had no African revolutionary movement to support those African brothers and sisters, and which was a problem, that the ones who were in prison didn't understand why they couldn't get the kind of support that they needed from the African Revolution, because we're in jail. You are it. But we had groups like Prairie Fire Organizing Committees, white groups, who could become substitutes, you know, for that. So they had a tremendous amount of influence. And on one occasion, when we are now reasserting the influence of the Black Revolution over this prison question, there was to be an event at the prison at
San Quentin.
No. This is the courthouse where the shootout happened, where. In Marin County. Marin County, yeah, Marin County. This is where Jonathan Jackson had been killed and what have you, and so there was to be this event, some kind of anniversary event. And we told the white people that the Africans are going to do this event there. What we want you to do is go to the white community and organize solidarity in the white community with what we're going to do, and they freaked out. Yeah. And so, and then we started hearing from the prison that the party was chasing away their white allies and stuff like that. We had confrontations. They sent gunmen. They sent people with guns to attack our meetings and what have you. So it was, you know, hairy in a lot of different ways that we don't have enough time to go into at this moment. But yeah, it was not a slam dunk. Oh.
Did we have any questions from the live audience or comments that wanted to be made? You can go ahead and come up now to the mic.
Uhuru. I really appreciate this study and the last study, studying the history of the party, and I really appreciate you going more into the history that the party has had with the relationship with organizations like ZANU and the Iranians. And my question was, what was the relationship that the party has had with the Palestinians? Uhuru.
That's a really great question, because we had an extremely close relationship at certain junctures with the Palestinian Liberation Movement. In particular, we had the closest relationship was with the Popular PFLP, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. As you know, the Palestinian Liberation Organization was a coalition of a lot of different groups, with the key one, because of influence and resources, being Fatah, that was headed by Yasser Arafat, who was very close to the reactionary Arab regimes, who funded it and kept it afloat. While on the other hand, you had groups like the PFLP, Palestinian Front, and then there was the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine and stuff like that. We had relationships with DFLP as well, but the PFLP was the group that we thought we had closest unity with. And over a period of time, I mean, I have spoken in the Bay Area to Palestinian organizations. So these were combined groups of Palestinians, I mean, packed, I mean, hundreds, perhaps thousands of people in the room. And what I have always done is go beyond where most of the leaders were prepared to go in terms of defining that struggle and what, had to be done, et cetera. And I have gotten extraordinary, I mean, standing ovations, raucous ovations, more than even what their leaders, because their leaders always, they had really shabby positions. That's not far different from what you see coming from Fatah or the PLO or the Palestinian Authority, even at this moment. So we've had close relationships. We participate in demonstrations and radios, yeah, just all kinds of stuff with them. Yeah.
Chairman, I just wanted to tell an experience. The chairman, well, part of key to what was happening was that the white left in this country had resources and glommed on to all the national liberation movements, so they needed, whatever, they went with them. But there was this, in San Francisco, there was a big event in probably 1979 or 80, and it was a Palestinian event, but there were Palestinian and Arab people that came from all over California to attend it. And it was in a union hall, and there were probably 1,000 people there because there was balconies. There were balconies. Right. Every balcony was packed to the gills. Right. And they had, the chairman was going to speak, but this was coordinated by the white left. Yeah. So you had like 5 minutes, and it was like at 10 o'clock. They always put it really late, really short. And all the other speeches were so meaningless. But in any case, when the chairman got up there and he said, they call the Palestinians the terrorists. Well, I am proud to number among the terrorists. And the entire room, they started stamping their feet, chanting, "The people united will never be defeated." And they did that for at least 10 or 15 minutes. And then the chairman got to finish his speech. And when he came down off the stage, I mean, he was like mobbed by Palestinian people, and they were just embracing him and just, saying, this is the leader we need. But the white left has played a huge role in attempting to keep the party from those relationships inside the U.S. Yeah. And, but that was that was an example of the regard, just the unity expressed by the party and by the Palestinian forces.
Uhuru. And we have one question online from Willie Robinson, located in Huntsville, Alabama, asking, Uhuru, are we practicing group economics? Uhuru.
Yeah, we're practicing group economics. We're in a group economic place right now in this Aquaba Hall at the Uhuru House in St. Petersburg, Florida. And if you're in Huntsville, you see some of the group economics we're practicing with Zenzele. And I hope you're part of the group that's given all the resources you can to support Zenzele and raising support from throughout Huntsville and every place else, because that's the solution for us. And unfortunately, many of us who believe in group economics don't practice it enough. So I'm hoping that this is someone who is in touch with Zenzele and helping to grow that. Uhuru.
Yeah, we actually have a couple people, seems like they're in the southern region, people asking how can they join in North Carolina, and I see Comrade Kobina in there already communicating from this study. So Uhuru. And I also wanted to acknowledge that we had a comrade in occupied Azania, or South Africa, watching, Linda, and excuse me if I pronounced this last name wrong, Nsitini, and she is in occupied Azania
Or South Africa.
or South Africa. Yeah, she's been tuning in via the YouTube. And she made a statement earlier, she just said, Uhuru comrades, I'm watching in occupied Azania. We have a comment from Grady Brown.
Please relate to.
E Africa. Not sure where Grady Brown is from, but they said, enjoy what I'm learning today. Feeding the mind is much better than feeding the belly. Yeah, that looks like all the questions that we have today, unless there's anything else in the room. Oh, All In Ben. Uhuru. All In Ben works with Black Power 96.3 radio station. Uhuru Ben.
Uhuru. I want to thank you, Chairman, for enlightening me on a lot of things. I mean, a lot I've learned about the 70s. I was actually born in 77, and I didn't know all those things was going on, so, but I appreciate all you guys coming out, and, you know, I'm going to be as much as I can. Uhuru.
We want to appreciate All In Ben, too. All In Ben, all in. Ben is all in. All In Ben is here from St. Petersburg, and he and his older sister, Tamika, also work with Black Power 96 here in St. Petersburg, Florida, and they, in many ways, are going to be key to the work that we do in St. Petersburg, Florida, because they're connected. They're connected with these communities, they're connected with the streets and what have you, and you can't win the revolution unless you win the streets, you know, and that's just the way that is, for real. So we're happy to see All In Ben. This is the working class that we're talking about that will become the ruling class. Uhuru, yeah.
Well, that looks like that's going to conclude our Q&A segment for today. And I just really want to appreciate and salute Chairman Yeshitela, your leadership over these past decades. And, you know, the reason why we can be here today and say the things that we can say out of our mouths today. I want to salute this panel and appreciate all of the work that these comrades have put in, the veterans of this movement, Comrade Chimarenga Slombao, Chairwoman Penny Hess of the African People's Solidarity Committee. And appreciate all of you for tuning in with us. And, you know, if you do have any other questions that we're not able to address at this moment, you know, you can find plenty of information about the party, you know, at theburningspear.com. You know, much more information, much more news on that. Also, Burning Spear TV has all of the past Omali Taught Me Sunday studies for, you know, any additional information, any other studies you want to watch. You guys can tune into those as well. And just to let you guys know that if your question wasn't answered in this discussion at all, we do have a moderator and staff who will be contacting you, getting your questions seen by the chairman, and making sure that everybody gets the information that they need. And this study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, Winning the War of Ideas. For your worldwide revolutionary news and analysis, visit theburningspear.com. For revolutionary radio, dynamic shows, and music by Africans all around the world, tune in to Black Power 96.3 FM, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via the Black Power 96 app for Apple and Android, or online at blackpower96.org. Did you unite with what you heard today and want to learn more about how you can get involved in the African People's Socialist Party, no matter where you are? Visit apspuhuru.org for all information regarding how you can apply and become a part of the vanguard of the African Revolution. Join the Freedom Mass Choir and Band. The Freedom Mass Choir and Band is an all-African community group of singers and instrumentalists that sing songs of resistance and revolution. Members are located throughout the United States and attend weekly rehearsals, both in person and via live stream and video. Sign up by emailing blackpowerchoir@gmail.com or call 727-537-6736. This December, Uhuru Foods and Pies is calling on you to come to Oakland, California, or St. Petersburg, Florida, to be a part of baking and selling 10,000 Uhuru Pies to support the programs of the Black Power Blueprint. Uhuru Pies is a 37-year-old loved progressive tradition in California and Florida. And this last week, this last week up to December 24th, brigades will meet at the Aquaba Hall for overviews and summation, be out in the community selling Uhuru Pies, including the signature Uhuru Sweet Potato Pie, baking, phone banking, and winning people to support Black self-determination and reparations to Black Power Blueprint. This is your last chance before the conclusion of this holiday season. Visit uhurupies.org for more information. On March 23rd and 24th, join the African National Women's Organization for their plenary being held in St. Louis, Missouri. African women's role in the revolution is on the front lines, and ANWO helps us to understand this by showing its tremendous leadership of African women, heading important campaigns like Arrest CPS, the state apparatus that steals black children away from their mothers and places them in the hands of the system to be either abused or kidnapped by white people. All African women should be a part of ANWO, and this plenary will make it clear why. Visit anwoohuru.org to learn more about this event. April 6th and 7th, the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations will be conducting its third electoral campaign school in St. Petersburg, Florida. Do you want to learn how to run for office on a revolutionary platform such as the National Black Political Agenda for Self-Determination and win? You don't want to miss this school. With speakers from the BIB Steering Committee, including Chairman Omali Yeshitela, you can learn from the best. Visit blackisbackcoalition.org for more info on the electoral campaign school. The movement for white solidarity with black power is growing. Witness it at the Uhuru Solidarity Movement National Convention, April 13th and 14th in St. Louis, Missouri. Come see the growth of white reparations to African people and learn the role that white people can play in creating a future free of oppression. Visit uhurusolidarity.org to learn more about this convention. If you're local to St. Pete or St. Louis at the Uhuru House, 3 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central, the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement will be hosting our Black Power Sunday rally, raising important concerns and community issues and organizing to overturn them. If you're local to any of these places, come on to 1245 Tyron Lewis Avenue South or 4101 West Florissant to learn how you can get involved and fight back against things like police brutality, gentrification, homelessness, joblessness, and all other issues plaguing our communities. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch us next Sunday for the next Omali Taught Me. Uhuru. And one more statement for Chair.
I just wanted to announce just two more things. One, many people in this room now, including myself, we ooze it up. In other words, if you want to really get revolutionary fashion, you should be connected to the institutions. Uzi is from the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. It's an economic institution. They are the ones who hooked this up that I'm wearing now. If you like it, get in touch with Uzi so you can do that. And also, there's Uhuru Planet, where we have revolutionary attire coming from, great stuff. And also Zenzele in Huntsville. So you can find those through connecting with us through our website. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that on January 21st, there's going to be a critical mobilization here in St. Petersburg, Florida. And we will be calling on Africans and other people from all over to come into St. Petersburg, Florida, where the government on last year locked down the entire African community that was attempting to celebrate Martin Luther King Day. So on every year, the largest Martin Luther King parade and gathering in the country happens in St. Petersburg, Florida. And this is a day when African vendors come out on the streets and make at least half of the income they get for the year happens on Martin Luther King celebration. And the city of St. Petersburg in the process of whitening the city, pushing African people out, gentrifying and what have you, cutting off every means that the people have for trying to secure some kind of income and circulating money inside this community. At the same time, they're building high-rises and condominiums and other kinds of things for white people in this city. They sent a fierce police occupation. It was almost unbelievable. It was like Palestine on steroids, how nobody could move in the community and nobody could make any economic advances through the Martin Luther King Day celebration on Martin Luther King Street. So what we are saying is it's not going to be that way this time. So we intend to initiate civil disobedience, whatever, to bust it up. This is high tourist season where all the white people from everywhere come into St. Petersburg, and the whole gentrification that they're doing in our city relies on white people, white investors feeling that this is an investor-friendly city. We are saying that we will initiate in civil disobedience and whatever else to disrupt this attack on the Martin Luther King celebration that allows African people and vendors to come out and vend, and African people an opportunity to come out and buy from each other. So we will be calling on you. You should mark January 21st, put it on your calendar. Especially in the southeast region, but everywhere we are located where people have the ability to get here, start planning to get here now, because we are going to defy that. And just wanted to, I think it was important to put that out. Uhuru.
Thank you, Chairman. And also one more announcement that I did forget is that that Chairman Omali Yeshitela's newest book will be coming out at the end of February. Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution, is available for pre-order now on burningspearmarketplace.com. It features all 10 chapters from the political report to the African People's Socialist Party's 7th Congress, which provides historical context and analysis on the deepening crisis of imperialism and the rising resistance by African and other colonized peoples around the world. The book covers topics such as why the African People's Socialist Party has been and is the vanguard of the revolution in the world today, how the party solved the problems of the revolution, how the party survived the counterinsurgency, the strategy for putting African Socialist Internationalist dual power in practice, the state of the party, as well as the theory of African internationalism and the question of the African nation, which are reprinted from the party's groundbreaking book from 2014, An Uneasy Equilibrium. Vanguard also features solidarity statements, resolutions, and photos from the 7th Party Congress. Reserve your copy today. Burning Spear Publications is releasing a limited first edition that includes color photos from the Congress that may not be available in later editions. When you pre-order, your copy will be signed by the chairman, so please go to burningspearmarketplace.com and order today. Uhuru, that is the end of our announcements. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, catch us next week. Like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV YouTube channel so you guys can be in tune with next Sunday when we come back with Chairman Yeshitela for the Omali Taught Me Sunday study. Uhuru.